Good morning, everyone. Fortunately, you can see a lot of me today. I'm talking after this panel. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to chair this panel. Sid could not be with us, unfortunately, due to an emergency. So we're going to try and explore with my colleagues here some of the big questions around the implications of AI and fintech. And we have some great experts here from very different backgrounds, from a very technical, from the banking sector, from the investment sector, and from the journalism of AI and blockchain sector. So I'd like to start off with sort of the main question that some of us may be asking ourselves here. I mean, we have some experts in the room, and from my conversations with people in this room yesterday, it was clear that there was a very diverse set of other experts, and not just fintech, not just blockchain, not just AI. So to help our audience to get to grips with what fintech is and what are the AI challenges to this domain, I'd like to ask our Dinis to maybe give us an idea of what fintech is about, what's this field about, and where maybe AI can be useful in this area. And maybe I'll ask some questions to the other panelists.
Thank you. So good morning, bonjour, tout le monde. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think these areas, especially when we touch fintech, AI and blockchain, we're talking about the foundational technologies of our age. Fintech is a big buzzword that touches finance and technologies, and anything, we can say that anything that is about financial operations worldwide at the moment touches technology. So this keyword is very broader because it touches the different levels of nuances between financial technologies and technologies in finance. So we talk about payments, wealth management, banking systems, AI-centric, fintech-related products, and this is a big thing right now. We're talking about probably the biggest trend in terms of banking and finance worldwide, from investment banking to central banks to everything. So what is being right now, and I think this is particularly the interesting challenge for a country like Mauritius and for all of us in the industry, is that at the moment we cannot do anything without technology. And as was mentioned before in terms of both the speakers from the previous panel and as well the previous speaker in terms of the French relationships, we're talking about right now a big shift in terms of the way we look at technology and the way we look at different sectors of society. So when it comes in terms of finance, definitely there's no bank in the world, no financial institution in the world that is not right now looking at data systems, dashboards, and other different things. So this is all the big concept of fintech. And of course, fintech at the moment, we talk about the $1 trillion industry that touch operations from governments, central governments, and central banks, and so forth. Well, I think the most interesting part, especially in a World AI show, is how we look at fintech and AI. And this is probably the most sensitive level, because AI is another big buzzword. But at the same time, we are still in the beginning, very big ground zero of AI. We're talking mostly, what we do right now is machine learning. We're not even in terms of AI. So if you look at machine learning, it's even more important for fintech, because fintech is about financial transactions most of the time, and financial transactions is about data, it's about money, it's about value. So this part is the biggest shift that we have in the history of finance, and it's going to be, I think, the companies that will be the leaders, and they are already the leaders in the world, are actually becoming technological companies and less financial companies. So I think this bridge is particularly important for all of us here in the industry. For instance, I created the bank before, I work in investment banking, and I'm actually working a lot with banks and central banks and the governments, and the relationship between the technologies, the financial system, and the AI, especially the part of data machine learning, is the critical time and the critical thing for our time. And I think right now is how can we use this for our own sake and for our own good, but at the same time with the realism necessary for creating a central UI/UX technology and experience for the users and for us in terms of industry players.
Thanks for that, Dinis. So you touched on a large number of things, and I want to get to Paresh in his own with his own experience. How have you seen fintech evolved over the last few years, and where do you think it's going to in your own sector, the banking sector, and how is AI part of that?
Yeah, sure. So I think you covered quite a bit there. So I think we need to clarify what fintech actually is. I mean, it essentially stands for financial technology, which large financial institutions and banks have been doing for years and for decades. But I think that the word fintech has actually become synonymous with the startup culture, with disintermediation, with disruption, with revolutionizing the actual industry. So I think, as an introduction, I think a couple of years ago, there was an existential threat on financial institutions and big corporates, and we thought that fintechs were going to come in and basically take over big banks. I think that we've come to a realization that that's not going to be the case anytime soon. I know from a very libertarian point of view, especially when we talk about cryptocurrencies and blockchain, there's a lot of people that feel that down with commercial banks, down with central banks, but I don't think we're going to see that anytime soon. So what we're now seeing at the moment is a shift towards a symbiotic relationship between the big financial institutions and the smaller players, the fintechs and the startups. And especially with the EU bringing in legislation like PSD2, this has completely changed the game. This has opened the floodgates for collaboration between fintechs and the big corporations. So what we're essentially seeing now is banks that would typically specialize in pure verticals. We're now seeing that the banks and the financial institutions are playing at the bottom end, playing up the foundation layer to support core banking systems, to support various different products. And then we're seeing a top layer emerge where fintechs and startups who can operate very quickly at a very rapid rate, at a very lean and agile manner, produce proper value propositions for the end user, for the client, that can typically aggregate along many different sources and provide a value proposition back to the client. So particularly with Standard Bank, with a big corporate, we're seeing multiple kind of segments within the business. If you look at the transactional banking, what we call personal and private banking, of course there is going to be a certain niche sector where cryptocurrencies is going to attack and going to take, gain a lot of traction and undermine, a lot of the revenues being generated from transactional banking. But we're also seeing that, we can partner with fintechs in the corporate investment banking space to have a look at, algorithmic trading, monitoring, compliance systems, fraud detection and card detection. So I'll kind of pause there and then pick up on that.
We'll definitely come back to the security side of things in a bit and this algorithmic trading side of things. So Dave, you're local, you are part of the fintech industry in this country. How are you seeing the evolution of the fintech industry in Mauritius, and in terms of advice you give to, or your own take on strategy in this sector? What have you seen?
Hello, good morning everybody. So what I can say right now, let's say about fintech, it's the first thing we need to realize is like we compare, let's say, traditional banks with new players coming to the market. It's like before, if we have traditional banks and let's say traditional financial institutions, things were, let's say, taking a lot of time to be done in terms of servicing to the customers and so on. And when we look at financial services, let's say new technologies like mobile payments, like using AI or blockchain and so on, what they are saying with financial services is like things are going to be much faster, it's going to be cheaper, and it's going to be with much more convenience, like for instance, internet banking with mobile apps and so on. These are things that have already been deployed in Mauritius. We have the banks as well that have started changing their delivery to the customer. The normal way of interacting with the customers have changed through mobile apps and so on. But then what we are seeing as well is like we have the traditional players changing and adapting and starting to use fintech solutions. But we have also new players, totally new players now coming to the market. If you look at, for instance, Gopal Group, I mean Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple and so on, they themselves, they are over-the-top players, but now they are entering into the market with new solutions. They are offering financial services themselves. They can be sitting anywhere, I would say abroad, but then they are starting to offer these services. And I think even in Mauritius, we will be having new players coming to the market that maybe can disrupt a little bit the market. They will be coming with totally new solutions, new way of doing the business. But then they need to go through, the regulations and so on. They need to apply for licenses, and there, I would say, new frameworks have been put in place by the authorities and so on. And new players now need to apply to the authorities and then get the licenses. And once the licenses are there, so they can roll out new services and so on.
Thanks for that, Dave. We're going to come back to regulation later again, but just to get Marc's views on what's been said, but maybe from a technical perspective. We've talked a lot about, the other speakers have talked a lot about automating a number of transactions, and that's a nice part of automation. It has to do with automation. What about the AI side of things? Where is AI machine learning taking its place within the fintech sector from a technical perspective? And I understand there's lots of data flying around.
Yeah.
How are you managing all the big data issue with AI machine learning, for example?
Yes, this is a very good point. Actually, if you look at what has been explained, you have a big trend which is the level of opening and the need of new services, then meaning new applications or adaptation of existing applications to match all the needs of these new services. And it will mean indeed new development, it will mean a huge volume of data and transactions to manage, and it will not be limited actually to a single environment. Fintech or PSD2 means a total opening, and not simply the usual data center of the company, but the ability to connect to plenty of different clouds. Internal clouds of a big financial institution, but also public clouds. And AI can help a lot to learn and understand the kind of transactions that happen, and also make sure that in order to match all regulation needs, we are able to assess permanently that the transaction, and then it means the application, is behaving well.
Could you give an example?
Yes, absolutely. Typically, we are working with some financial institutions, not only banking, because very often we are targeting on banking, but insurance is also very keen on this. And when you have end user connecting through his mobile to typically his banking application to consult his accounts, how can we manage to audit, assess permanently the performance and also the, let's say, relevancy of the transaction itself. So it's very important to learn continuously what is the right behavior of an application, and then be able to raise any kind of alert to the IT team of a specific banking institution. And this should not be limited, by the way, to the traffic between your own data center, for example, at the Standard Bank, and the mobile device of the user, but also be able to watch carefully what's happening with all different clouds. And this is a challenge that we are addressing now, and that we are able then to work with banking or insurance companies to ensure the satisfaction of users, the right collection of data, and as we said, be able to learn and then apply what has been done to the respect of the services.
Thanks for that, Marc. It's interesting to talk about the insurance sector, and yesterday there was a mention of loans also being constructed based on very personal data that's been tracked on mobile phone or from your personal environment. That, as we saw yesterday, there was an example of loans being given in a biased way because of failures in AI. And that leads to some interesting questions around how do you regulate access to personal data, how do you design services that work best for the end user. Dinis, maybe you can have give us your views on how a fintech should have a strategy around user data and regulation in that respect.
Yeah, I think this is probably the most important challenge of our time. And I think it's a challenge. So I think if you look at society, at the moment we're in the process of digital transformation, but we have a paradox. So around 90% of the world economy, and I'm going to speak that in my keynote, is not digital. So 90% of the world economy is still paper. We need to realize that. We talk about paper and the real paper. And then the 10% that is digital, it's where the money is, and now we need to make a shift from the 10%, for the 10% to become 100%. So that's the first challenge from a regulatory perspective, how you regulate something that is already digital and the paper. And then the other challenge is that, however, we have only 10% of the world economy that is digital. I mean, digital is using internet, digital software and tools. But we have almost 90% of users of smartphones and digital devices. So we have a paradox, is that the economy is paper, but the world population of society is digital. So that's the first kind of paradox that we have in modern society. So that means people have access to digital faster than actually our governments, our central systems and everything else. So then when it comes to regulatory part, that's the very sensitive stuff, because of course we have a schizophrenic approach of all of this. So in one end, it was mentioned the cryptocurrencies. First, I was involved in 10 cryptocurrencies. However, I decided to not be too much involved because of all the risks. But I work with at least 10 regulators, and this is a very interesting point. It's just a tiny part of the ecosystem. Because if you look at the world transactions in terms of money, we talk about $5 trillion of forex transactions every day. But the cryptocurrencies, on its peak in December last year, were only $700 billion, is quite considerable. And today, as we speak, is around $120 billion, which is a very tiny drop in the ocean in terms of transactions of money. So regulators have a challenge when it comes to fintech for different layers. The first one is understanding how these technologies can improve banks and central governments and central banks, and at the same time because central banks have to lead this. But then we have a paradox from a pure technological perspective, is that as we digitalize money, the systems of digital are supposed to be rational, mathematical driven, machine driven and so forth. But the way we've been creating money by central governments is very irrational, driven by political, a lot of other things that I'm not going to mention. So I think we have a lot of challenge on this level. So in one end, I think the most important thing right now to regulate this new digital transformation world, the first stage is being conscious about this. And I think no government can have the vanity or stupidity of not being conscious about this. It has to tackle this from a very, very holistic view, because otherwise these governments will be out of business and will be taken by the players of Silicon Valley and the Chinese fintech players. And a very important thing right now, this is happening, okay? The biggest fintech player in the world, and everyone knows what it is Amazon in the Western world. And in China is Tencent and Alibaba Group. These are the biggest fintech and financial players in the planet. They have more money than governments and all the companies that we talk. So I think we have already something very disruptive. So to regulate this is, we need to find a balance between the different operations that all of us are involved, from banks to technology, and at the same time understand how to take these, I think especially with sandboxes, because I think governments have to work on this, but at the same time regulate. So from a data perspective, the biggest challenge and the biggest asset of our time is data. But none of us own our data. None. All our data is owned by Silicon Valley and by a couple of 5 or 6 companies worldwide. So first thing is for us to be conscious that we own our data, that this is our data. And then secondly is the companies that are tackling this data need to find ways of working with governments and regulate this. So I think it's a big challenge, but I think it's the best time to do it, and we have to do it now. I think GDPR is a good example of Europe trying to somehow touch something that is a complete jungle. Because at the moment, anyone here, first I can get data from anyone here in the dark web for $10 to know anything about each of the people here, or whatever person you are. And this is a big challenge. And this is the dark web. Of course, it's a bit much more dark. But at the same point is that we have our data, we give our data for free, we don't get anything with it, and still we are even manipulated by our data, if you look at political things. So I think the point right now is governments to tackle this urgently, and for and I think it was very interesting what the French speakers mentioned, the governments, the institutions and the research centers have to work together, and the regulators.
Thanks for that, Dinis. That's very insightful. It's interesting you putting the onus on governments to come up with the regulatory frameworks and all the sort of the core nuggets of control. I have a question then for Paresh around what, given that technology, the one thing that we've learned in the last day and through a number of these stress conferences is technology is moving at an accelerating pace. It keeps accelerating, and government tends to be very slow at producing laws that can help us regulate some of the challenges that emerge with new technologies, with AI. Given that we don't know yet what the impact of AI will actually be on our daily lives and on the banking sector or on many other sectors, what is the role of banks and what is the role of government in terms of regulating themselves or government helping institutions like banks and other financial institutions regulate themselves? And what's the approach being taken? And is there an approach being taken and a strategic view on how we should self-regulate?
Sure. So just to touch on one or two other points in your previous question, I think that identity is a hot topic at the moment, right? GDPR for me is a stopgap measure because identity either doesn't exist or it's completely broken, right? Of the 2 billion unbanked people globally right now, 1.5 billion people are unbanked due to the lack of identity. Right? And these are the people that are excluded from the financial system, right? And I'm not talking about the people like you and me and everyone in this room. I'm talking about people who do not have an identity, that cannot go to a bank, and that cannot open up a bank account. And I'm actually giving a talk tomorrow on blockchain and self-sovereign identity and ownership of data, so please, if you're around, stay for that, I'll talk a bit more on that. But really, it is about, how do we move to the next generation? How do we move to the next web? Because right now, the online digital presence is completely broken. So I think that all of these various different stopgap measures, and in South Africa we have something called POPI, which is protection of personal information, which is pretty much the equivalent of GDPR. But to kind of segue into your question, I think that regulation is needed. Okay, again, I'll go back to my point, is that central banks and governments are not going anywhere anytime soon. So when we start talking about cryptocurrencies, yes, it is a drop in the ocean. My view is that this is going to be the future of where we're going to move with financial institutions, but there's going to be a convergence of the current financial system together with what we're seeing with decentralized, distributed peer-to-peer mechanisms. So I think it is really about working with the government. I know that government has stigma around moving too slowly, overcomplicated regulation, overcomplicated policy. But I don't think that we should be reinventing this. And especially, my advice to Mauritius is to look at the other countries out there that have almost succeeded in their policy and regulation. So if you look at Singapore or Switzerland or Canada to a certain extent, always use Singapore as a shining beacon, how they've really become this smart financial center of the world, the smart financial hub of the world, is really to bring various different participants and actors together. So they bring the fintech and the startup world, they bring together the big corporations, the big banks and the organizations. They tap into the academia, the research societies, and the government. Right? If you have a look at what the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the MAS, is actually doing, this is very progressive thinking. Have a look at what they're doing in the blockchain space in terms of Project Ubin, tokenization of the sovereign fiat currency onto the blockchain, onto a blockchain network to facilitate peer-to-peer payments. This is very progressive thinking coming from a government organization. And I think that we're seeing very, very levels of adoption and of engagement from central banks, all the way from banning a technology like crypto and blockchain, etc., all the way up to countries like Singapore that are very big advocates. So, one of the stances that we take in South Africa at the moment is we've just recently had a fintech unit in our South African Reserve Bank, which is our central bank. And that was formed back end of last year to actually have a look at what is exponential technology going to mean for the country, right? And this for me is, a step in the right direction. So we launched a project called Project Gopal. I'll talk a little bit about it tomorrow. But it's really to have a look at what peer-to-peer payments would be. But my underlying kind of thoughts around this is central banks should be taking a progressive stance to understand what this exponential technology of AI, blockchain, big data is actually going to mean to the country. Now, I'm not saying execute projects to take it to production initially, but it is just about playing around with the technology, demystifying what all of this means. There is a lot of uncertainty. What is AI? Is it going to take over jobs? Are there going to be cyborgs walking around on the street? Back to Hans's point yesterday, is that might be a dystopian future, but we need to understand what this is actually going to mean. So, my advice to Mauritius, as government authorities and central banks, is to form a fintech unit. Have resources allocated to understanding what this means, and start executing POCs and experiments and projects to actually engage with industry and move the country forward.
That's really, really great to hear. And I'd like to get Dave's view on this. I mean, Mauritius is very well known in the offshore sector, and I just wanted to understand in Mauritius, what's the appetite for experimentation with these new technologies, and how are you going about, for example, tackling issues with data protection and regulation of AI?
Yeah, I think in the previous presentation, the first presentation we had in the morning, it was clearly mentioned that in Mauritius we have already the new law, the Data Protection Act 2017 Act, and which takes into consideration the requirements in GDPR, and also which is, let's say, meets the requirements for Mauritius itself. And in Mauritius, we have companies that they have to comply to the DPA Act, the Data Protection Act. And we at Mauritius Capital Technology, we are offering, in fact, information security advisory services, where we go and advise customers about, companies, businesses, about the data, whether it's compliant to the Data Protection Act in Mauritius or not, and so on. We also have companies who are, let's say, the offshore and so on. They are offering services, let's say, to Europe and so on. And there they need to be compliant with GDPR, and there as well we're offering services to help them see whether they are compliant with GDPR or not, and so on. So these are things which are already being done. But having said so, if we are talking about AI and so on, we saw as well that, for AI to work, we really need huge amount of data. It's not like, we have just a small amount and it will work. We need to train the systems and so on. It requires lots of information. If I take the case of, for instance, which may help, let's say in fintech, it's about fraud prevention. And it's a case where indeed AI may help to help prevent fraud and so on. And why is that so? Is that most of the, let's say, institutions, financial institutions, they have lots of data on their, let's say, on their customers and so on. And it's like, it's not only data about 1 month data and so on, they have data for several years about transactions. If I take the case of credit card transactions and so on, so they will be having data of several years, which they can use in fact to determine the transaction pattern of their customers and so on. So that, for instance, if a credit card is being used abroad or in a fraudulent way and so on, the AI systems can automatically real-time detect and flag that, okay, there may be a fraudulent transaction being done and so on. Instead of having, if we have the AI systems, so it's going to be done automatically and in real time. Or else we may have systems where, you have people who are manually checking and so on, and then afterwards, I think maybe lots of people over here have received, when they were abroad, they have received calls from the banks informing them that, okay, we've seen a particular transaction, and please tell us whether it's genuine or not, and so on. And at times it's not in real time, it's like we get that call a few days afterwards because it takes time to process and so on. So if we have a system like AI, so it helps because it will be monitoring all the transactions and so on in real time and then flag it very rapidly. So this is where AI may help. But then there is the issue of how much data you can give, especially if you consider about confidential data or not, and so on.
Let's do so go on to the next question, which is really about masses of data. Nicola earlier talked about networks of little data oceans rather than just data lakes. And Paresh talked about online identity or identity itself. In the world of GDPR, in the world of regulation, in the world of AI, and AI which may do things that people expect it to do, that may be trained as a black box and learn to do certain things with online identities, train itself to do things that we don't understand, capture with our robots. How are you addressing these sort of questions? Because multiple forces are acting on the technical, on the back-end system, which we don't see. How are you coping with all these pressures from the AI algorithms becoming faster and better at doing things, needing more compute power, us having to deal with tracking online identity and networking multiple databases? What's the future looking like for you?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and hopefully this is not the future. Plenty of things are already present. Dr. Morgan mentioned this morning in her introduction that AI can bring indeed also new capabilities for security, mentioning authentication and so on. And the key point is, as you mentioned, Gopal, to take into account the different situation we are in. And we all know that plenty of things are totally new, hidden, unknown at this time. And the goal is to use, thanks to software, AI to bring us an additional understanding and a faster capacity to understand things. AI is today starting to be used for cybersecurity typically. Let me take one example, which is one of the most famous attacks which happened recently, which is WannaCry. As everyone has been impacted by WannaCry, I could expect that even in Mauritius, unfortunately, few companies were impacted. But the point is, it was something totally unknown. And what AI is able to bring us is to not try to understand every kind of threat, because this is impossible. Even if you are patching a few solutions or few protections against plenty of threats, your target is still too big to protect. So the goal is actually first to reduce the surface of exposition using the right methodology of cybersecurity, what we call cyber hygiene, and capabilities like microsegmentation. And then, instead of chasing the bad, really focusing on what is the good behavior. And what AI can bring us is the ability to understand what is the right behavior for an application, for a user connecting to an application, and limit the transactions and the application use to this good behavior. If you take the example of WannaCry, without entering into details, it was an unexpected and irrelevant IT action which happened, and that was used by WannaCry. If you know, thanks to AI, how your application must work and is supposed to work correctly, let's use AI to learn the right behavior, detect misbehavior, and then protect and adapt the security. So, with such approach, continuous learning, continuous protection, we are able now to address, as you say, the new applications, the new flow of data, and to be run over any kind of network. Continuous learning, continuous protection. This is the aim of AI for IT.
Thanks, Mark. That's really interesting. So we've covered quite a few topics so far with our panelists, and I'd like to open questions to the floor. So if you have any key attendees who want to ask some questions, please raise your hands and we'll give you a mic.
Yes, I want to be down to earth with a question. We know that AI and automation are going to make fintech do things faster than traditionally was being done in the bank. And By doing so, it's going to eliminate lots of intermediaries in between transactions, right? And we know that technology is supposed to serve mankind, to give satisfaction to everybody, right? We know that government is very interested in creating jobs. Now, would this not create a disruption in the sense that those customers, right, in the modern trend, they want to get things faster, and a bank also wants to satisfy them, but this disruption may cause lots of people to lose jobs, which is a problem to government. How would the bank, the people, customers, and government reconcile so that we do something for the benefits of everybody?
Yeah, can I just take a quick stab at this? So, I know that there was quite a bit of talk yesterday around the future of work and where we're going to go, and especially when Sophia came out, there was talks around job losses will be minimal and don't worry about it. I take a very contrarian view to this, right? I think that there's going to be mass amounts of job losses in the future. May not be immediate future. We're probably talking 5-10 years down the line, and I think that the gap between the very elite and very professional down to the kind of unprofessional jobs are going to widen quite a bit, right? Because I don't think that we are in the exact same revolutions that we've seen in the past. I think that the upskilling, the ramp to upskill to be able to control robots, actually code AI algorithms is very high. So you're not going to take somebody whose job is literally to data capture every single day and train them up to become proficient in coding models for algorithmic trading, for example. So I think that gap is going to really widen, and that's my contrary view. So the actual way that we can alleviate this is to start from the grassroots. How do we change the education system? I was sitting and having lunch with a couple of chaps yesterday at the conference, and we talked about the education system here in Mauritius that really needs to be ramped up. We need to be skilling up our children from a very young age, teaching them how to code, how to program, how to analytically think in order for the future of work. Right? And I think that's what needs to be tackled at an education system, because this gap is going to get far and wide very, very quick.
Yeah, I just want to react to it because I have a case that's for Mauritius. At Mauritius Capital, we are in the FinTech arm of Mauritius Group. And last year, in fact, I was mentioning before that, for FinTech, we are going to have new players on the market, which comes with new technologies and so on. So last year we started a new entity within the Mauritius Capital, which is doing consumer finance. And just to respond to my friend over there, it's like we are recruiting like crazy. So the business is growing very fast. It's like beyond our expectation, and we are really recruiting a lot of people, and we will continue to recruit. And even for the global business as well, we find that we are recruiting a lot. So just to reassure you, maybe somewhere in some places jobs will be lost, but others, if you have new players coming to the market, it will help create more jobs as well.
Yeah, and if you allow me to emphasize exactly what you said, we have seen in plenty of countries, not only in Europe but also emerging countries, as I have the chance to cover also Africa or Middle East, we have seen a lot of new jobs created in financial institutions, both banking and insurance, to create and develop new applications. So exactly one of the goals of the new education system. Second, having additional people typically taking care of security, data analysis, and so on. And very interesting point is that we see more and more in various companies, and particularly in the financial sector and fintech, people in charge of the customer satisfaction and of the customer experience. And how we are able to, how these companies are able to improve the experience of the user and of the customer, because at the end, this is what is most important, not only for the sake of the business, but also concerning the evolution and the introduction of new services. So definitively great opportunity provided by this and by the different technologies.
Sorry, Gopal, I just want to add a very quick point there as well. So I think it's broader than education. I think we need to be careful where AI is going, because it could really be only held in the hands of the elites, right? Because AI could potentially, be very expensive in the future if it is not so. At this point in time, I might be talking science fiction, but this is potentially where we are going. That people at the lower end of the LSMs will typically get left out, and the very elite will be, AI and biotechnology and nanotechnology will be accessible to only them. So, I think we have wider kind of issues to actually deal with, but that really starts at the grassroots education.
Dinis, before you try and answer that question, that was my last point to make really, is one thing I realized when trying to use some of these, sophisticated banking tools is, for example, in the UK we have Monzo. It's not even a bank, it's a card and allows you to track your spending and save your money. In the UK, in the US, you have Venmo for transfer. In Africa, you have M-Pesa, etc. But in I love M-Pesa. I find it's a really convenient thing to use. But in the UK, it's somewhat clunky and not always works very well. And I've always opted to go for a bank where I could speak to a human at the end of the line when I have an issue. And increasingly we see robots trying to answer questions. I'm just wondering whether you think, based on your experience, you see all these jobs actually being automated, and there's a push to have them automated, or there's a pushback from the market saying, no, we want these to still be human-driven, and therefore there won't be that many job loss.
Well, that's a very sensitive thing. I think the first thing is to answer to your question and to yours is that definitely we need to be prepared for around 500 million jobs worldwide to be changed or disappear. 500 million. And we need to be realistic about that. There's no way back. I think the challenge to pick both of you is, are we going to make the bridge between, first of all, is an awareness about these technologies, about this is changing all of us, from children. And I think there's a big problem, especially I've been working out in Africa, and I'm actually working, I build a software similar to M-Pesa in blockchain. And one of the things I've been learning is that, so first of all, there's 2.5, actually it's more than 2.5 billion people that have no access to financial inclusion. So to answer to your point is, the automation is getting bigger and bigger. So at the moment we have three kinds of interactions. Humans to humans, humans to machines, and machines to machines. This is happening, okay? This is not science fiction. This is happening now. Most of the data transactions we have is machine to machine. Most of the money in the world transactions, around 80 to 90% of the money transactions are done by machines and algorithms already. There's no science fiction on that, just work in a bank. So I think the point to you, I think the chatbots are very basic for now. I've been working chatbots every day, and at the moment they crash, they don't really answer much. But this is changing in the space of months. So I think we're going to have probably the next 2 to 3 years a massive revolution going in the area of chatbots and personal assistants. And if you look at Siri and all the other ones are already, Amazon is taking over the market and everyone is creating their own series. So I think from a financial perspective, so in one end there's a schizophrenic approach, that's a perception. And I think that's probably the biggest thing, because if you look at the Brexit, if you look at Trump elections, it was always about perception and manipulation of data and psychology. So thankfully, none of the banks are doing that. Thankfully, actually, the industry is actually behaving much better than actually the bigger players of data. So I think right now is that there's a lot of new jobs being created, especially, but these not like jobs for life, it's jobs for experiences, jobs for adapting to the market. And I think that is where there's hundreds of millions of jobs to be created. And any industrial revolution before in the history of mankind, it took part of society and shifted to a new level. So we're going to do this now. The thing is that normally, like we was said before, you take 100 years, now it will take 5 to 10 years. And this is the problem, is that the perception of even us, I think most of the people here in the room have very high education, and we have difficulty to understand everything around us. Even me, I'm an academic, I have to be keeping learning. So I think the challenge is how to take this to society, especially for young children and for education, because our education system needs to be much more dynamic, to have a continuous education for all life, and not to put people in a box for 3 years. This has to be a continuous education system. And this is where we can actually answer to these problems of the future of work and the future of finance and trading. Because at the end of the day, we always will need money or value transaction. And that's a massive business opportunity, especially in countries like Mauritius, because if you look at most of the world economy, is legacy systems, especially the big companies, big countries. So you don't have big legacy systems, you can go much faster, and you don't need to break what it was done by the last 100 years in some cases.
So on this note, I think I'd like to wrap up. We have only 20 seconds, so I'd just like to thank all the panelists for their contributions, and I hope the audience has hopefully learned something interesting in you, and if you want to continue conversations with the panelists, please do so.
Professor Ramchurn, just one thing, I would like to react to what Marc said with regards to cybersecurity, and I think it's important to say what's going on in Mauritius as well. So, just very quickly, especially with regards to AI in cybersecurity, you know, lots of things are happening on the cybersecurity space and so on. We have cyber attacks becoming more and more sophisticated. We have now organized crime going on and large-scale attacks. And indeed, we believe that having AI component into cybersecurity will help a lot. And we are working on some solutions. For instance, where you can put, let's say, systems into your network, and let's say for your business in the enterprise, and then what happens is that the system will it's like it behaves like the human immune system. For instance, if I just want to give you an analogy, for instance, we as humans, we go in different environments and so on. We are attacked every day by lots of things, but then the first level of security that we have is our own skin. Protects us. But then the second level of security that we have in the human body is the immune system. For instance, when we grow up, we have germs and bacteria and so on. So when it infects us, we have our own immune systems, which knows our body, which knows what are the cells which are okay, which are normal way of life within the body, and whatever which is external to the internal body, they will fight them back. So this is how the human immune system behaves. But we have, let's say, cybersecurity solutions based on machine learning, which are doing the same thing. We have a system, for instance, that we're deploying in businesses today. When you deploy it in your network, for instance, what it will do, first of all, it will learn about your network, just like machine learning does, the normal way of life within your enterprise, all your traffic patterns within the enterprise, it will learn about it. And then if there are anything which is abnormal, then it will react to it, it will detect it, and then it will also take actions to prevent it from happening. It's just like the human immune system. And what is good about it is, like, let's say for the human body, you have the skin, you can live, and as our friend was saying, you can have all your firewalls and so on, which are the perimeter level, at the network level. But then what happens sometimes is internally in the network you can have your own employees doing things which are not normal, or you can have types of attacks which are very low, very quiet, very stealthy, which are difficult to be detected, and which systems based on AI can detect because they analyze the traffic and they will detect abnormal behavior within your own network and so on. So these are things which are coming, and I think lots of security vendors are working on AI to get it done. And I believe maybe later on what we will be having is, if we're talking about using AI as a defense, we will also be having hackers using AI to launch attacks and so on. So we are going into a world where we'll be having, machine learning algorithm against machine learning algorithm, AI against AI. So it's like, this is where we are heading in the future.
Thanks for that. On this note, we'll close. Thank you very much for all your contributions, and if there